For nearly an hour, the White House briefing room had proceeded exactly as advertised. The president was delivering what the official schedule had called a routine economic update, standing behind the podium with the flags of both the United States and Canada arranged squarely behind his shoulders. The international press corps was in full attendance, notebooks open, cameras rolling, the quiet hum of a standard Washington afternoon. Then it happened. The president did not stumble over a statistic. He did not misstate a trade figure and correct himself. He did not express frustration in diplomatic language or allow a momentary emotion to slip. Instead, he looked directly into the live camera, surrounded by those flags and those journalists, and called the Prime Minister of Canada a liar, not once, 5 times in a single statement. The word landed each time with the same blunt force, liar. He accused Mark Carney of lying about trade numbers, about the deficit, about what America has done for Canada, and about who truly needs whom in the bilateral relationship. There was no qualification, no diplomatic softening, no private frustration voiced off the record. This was the President of the United States, in the White House briefing room, using the crudest word in political language to describe the leader of an allied nation during what was supposed to be a mundane economic address. The room went still for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Reporters exchanged glances, producers whispered into headsets, and across the border in Ottawa, Prime Minister Mark Carney was watching. What happened next has become, in the span of less than a week, the single most analyzed, most debated, and most unexpectedly devastating diplomatic counterpunch in modern memory. But here is the detail that makes this moment fundamentally different from every other political insult, every late-night monologue, every cycle of outrage and rebuttal that has saturated American politics for the past decade. Carney's response was not a speech. It was not a press conference. It did not feature graphs, expert panels, or a point-by-point forensic dismantling of the president's claims. It was 30 seconds long. In an era of hour-long cable specials, 1,000-word social media threads, and nonstop commentary, a man accused of lying by the most powerful person on earth replied in less time than it takes to wait for a traffic light to change. And those 30 seconds have done something that no lengthy rebuttal could have achieved. They have left Washington, not Ottawa, searching for an answer. They have forced the president's own press corps to ask questions that have no safe reply. And they have introduced a single word into the global political vocabulary, a word that has been translated into 46 languages and shared hundreds of millions of times. That word is mirror. To understand why 30 seconds was not merely sufficient but devastatingly effective, we have to go back to the accusation itself because the specifics matter enormously. This was not a vague or rhetorical attack. The president stood at the podium and said that Carney had lied about trade numbers, about the deficit, about what America has done for Canada, and about who needs whom in the bilateral relationship. The core accusation was that Carney had misrepresented the trade balance between the two countries, that he had fabricated or distorted data to make Canada's position appear stronger than it really was. That was the charge. That was the supposed crime, lying about economic statistics. Now here is where the story takes its first sharp turn. The data that Carney had cited in previous public statements, the numbers that the president called lies, came from 3 sources: the United States Bureau of Economic Analysis, the United States International Trade Commission, and the United States Department of Commerce. Not Canadian government agencies, not independent think tanks with a political leaning, not academic estimates. The official, published, taxpayer-funded data of the United States federal government. Carney had simply repeated what America's own statistical agencies had reported. He had not exaggerated. He had not cherry-picked. He had not spun the numbers in a creative direction. He had quoted the president's own government back to the president, and for that he was called a liar 5 times in front of the world. The diplomatic community reacted with a level of alarm rarely seen outside actual treaty crises. Former ambassadors used phrases like unprecedented in the post-war era and a severance of good faith. Allied governments issued carefully worded statements that, when translated from diplomatic language into plain English, said that the president had crossed a line that no Western leader had crossed in living memory. France expressed grave concern. Germany called the language beneath the standards of the alliance. Japan issued what analysts described as its strongest rebuke to a sitting American president since the end of the Second World War. The concern was not purely about Canada. It was about what this meant for every other ally. If the American president would publicly call the Prime Minister of Canada a liar for citing American data, what would stop him from doing the same to the Chancellor of Germany or the Prime Minister of Japan? The norms that make diplomacy possible, the assumption of basic good faith, the understanding that disagreements are about interests and not about personal integrity. Those norms had been shattered in a single press conference. And then the world waited for Carney's response. The expectation, unanimous among political analysts, diplomatic correspondents, and veteran commentators, was for something long, something detailed, something that would feature a press conference with charts, source documents, and a panel of economists and former trade officials lined up to validate every number. Some predicted economic retaliation. Others predicted a diplomatic escalation, the recall of ambassadors, the suspension of bilateral working groups. The consensus was that the severity of the provocation demanded a proportional response, and proportional meant substantial. Nobody predicted 30 seconds. Nobody predicted a single sheet of paper on a podium in a simple room in Ottawa, without visual aids, without expert witnesses, without any of the machinery of modern political communication. But here's what actually happened. Behind the scenes, Carney's communications team had prepared exactly the kind of detailed rebuttal that the world expected. 15 minutes of sourced, verified, airtight argument, complete with supporting documentation from multiple government agencies. It was thorough. It was correct. It would have been, by any conventional measure, an effective response. Carney read it in full, set it down, and according to multiple people in the room, said something that has since become the central quote of this entire episode. If I need 15 minutes to prove I'm not a liar, I've already lost. The truth does not need 15 minutes. Give me 30 seconds. His staff argued. They warned that brevity would be interpreted as having nothing to say. They said the global audience expected a show of force, a demonstration of evidentiary weight. Carney listened, nodded, and repeated, 30 seconds. Then he walked to the podium. The room in Ottawa was packed. Every major Canadian news outlet was there. International correspondents had filled every available seat. The feed was being watched live in every major newsroom on the planet. Carney stepped up alone with nothing but a single sheet of paper in his hand. No flag behind him was arranged differently than usual. No dramatic lighting, no music, just a man, a piece of paper, and a camera. He began by doing something that most communications professionals would advise against. He repeated the accusation in his own words. The President of the United States called me a liar today. He paused. 2 seconds of complete silence. He did not look away from the camera. He did not shuffle his notes. He let the words sit in the air, now under his control instead of the president's. Then he said that my statements about the bilateral trade balance were lies. Specifically, that the figures I cited on goods, services, energy, and supply chain integration were fabricated. He held up the single sheet of paper. This is the relevant data. It is from the United States Bureau of Economic Analysis, the United States International Trade Commission, and the United States Department of Commerce, all published within the last 90 days. It confirms on every metric I cited exactly what I said. Then he lowered the paper, and without raising his voice, without changing his expression, without a single theatrical gesture, he delivered the sequence that has since been replayed thousands of times. So either the president did not read his own government's data before calling me a liar. 1 second pause. Or he did read it and called me a liar anyway. 2 second pause. He let the binary land. There was no third option. The audience's brain had only 2 doors to choose from, and both led to the same devastating conclusion: ignorance or dishonesty. There was no escape hatch. Then Carney looked directly into the camera, the lens that was carrying his image to every screen on Earth, and said 5 words. The word he is looking for is mirror. He closed the folder, nodded once, stepped back from the podium, and left the room. 30 seconds had elapsed. The silence after he walked away lasted 4 full seconds before the room erupted in a chaos of journalists reaching for phones, producers shouting into headsets, and the unmistakable sound of a story breaking in real time. Within 15 minutes, the clip was airing in full on every major network. Nothing needed to be cut. Nothing needed to be explained. The response was its own context. Within an hour, Mirror was trending globally. Within 3 hours, it had been translated into 46 languages and shared across every social media platform on Earth. The word had entered the political vocabulary of the planet faster than any diplomatic statement in history. And the reason it worked, the reason 30 seconds defeated what could have been a 15-minute rebuttal, is encoded in the structure of those 30 seconds. The repetition of the accusation in Carney's own voice took ownership of the moment. He did not flinch from the word liar. He placed it on his own terms. The single sheet of paper was a visual signal that the evidence was so clear it required no binder, no stack of reports, just 1 page from the president's own government. The binary trap gave the audience exactly 2 conclusions, neither of which was favorable to the accuser. And the mirror line delivered the final cut. Not a counterattack, not a return insult, but a redirection that said the accusation applies to you, not to me. Look in the mirror. Warren Buffett, the investor whose name has become synonymous with long-term wisdom, watched the clip and offered an analysis that has since been cited in business schools and political science departments alike. Buffett said that Carney's 30 seconds were the single best demonstration of a principle he has practiced for 7 decades. The principle is this: the person who uses the fewest words in any negotiation, in any boardroom, in any high-stakes conversation, is almost always the person with the most power. Talking is what people do when they are uncertain. Briefity is what people do when they know. A confident person does not need 15 minutes. A confident person needs 30 seconds. And if 30 seconds is too long, they need one word. Carney needed one word: mirror. Trump needed hundreds of words and 5 repetitions of liar. The length of each response told you everything you needed to know about the strength of each position. The White House's reaction in the following days only confirmed the effectiveness of the trap. The press secretary held a briefing 2 hours after the clip aired and was immediately asked the question that Carney's binary had made unavoidable. The Prime Minister cited data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the International Trade Commission, and the Department of Commerce. Does the president dispute his own government's data? There was no safe answer. Yes would mean admitting that the president was contradicting his own administration's statistical agencies, an admission of institutional chaos. No would mean admitting that the data was correct, and therefore the president had called a foreign leader a liar for stating verified facts. The press secretary could not navigate the trap. The resulting footage, a senior official visibly struggling to answer a simple yes or no question, was clipped and shared nearly as widely as Carney's original 30 seconds. One veteran White House correspondent said on air that in 4 administrations, he had never seen a foreign leader neutralize a presidential attack so completely, so quickly, and with so few words. Republican strategists recognized the problem immediately. One speaking on background told a major outlet that the administration had been out-messaged by a 30-second clip using its own government's data. There was no counter, the strategist said. A long response looks defensive. A short response draws attention back to the clip. Ignoring it concedes the point. Carney had built a response with no winning countermove in less time than a television commercial. Senators from both parties were notably restrained in their public comments, a silence that political analysts interpreted as neither side wanting to draw additional attention to a clip that made the president look like a man who had brought a sledgehammer to a surgery and was outperformed by the surgeon. The polling that emerged in the following days was perhaps the most startling evidence of the response's effectiveness. Within 5 days, surveys showed that 63% of Americans, including 41% of Republicans, believed that Carney's response was effective or very effective. 57% said that the use of American government data undermined the president's accusation, and when asked who they found more credible in the exchange, 52% of all respondents chose Carney, a foreign leader, over their own president. Among independent voters, that number rose to 61%. Among voters under 35, it was 68%. A generation raised on information overload and finely tuned to distinguish substance from noise had made its judgment. Carney looked certain, Trump looked loud, and the public, as Buffett had predicted, could tell the difference. The international community absorbed the exchange as a template. Within 1 week, 2 allied foreign ministries had requested briefings from Ottawa, not on the substance of the trade dispute, but on the communication strategy. How do you prepare a 30-second response? How do you identify the single document that proves your case? How do you construct a binary with no escape? How do you choose the one word that redirects without counterattacking? The 30 seconds were being studied not as a political moment, but as a methodology, a replicable framework for responding to public attacks by larger powers. One European diplomat told the Financial Times that Canada had just written the manual, and the manual was 30 seconds long. A professor of political communication at the London School of Economics announced that the clip would be added to her graduate curriculum as the definitive case study in minimum word, maximum impact public communication, the first time a diplomatic exchange had been added to the program's syllabus in its 30-year history. So here is where we stand. The President of the United States called the Prime Minister of Canada a liar 5 times in a single statement, accusing him of fabricating trade data that was in fact sourced from the President's own government agencies. Carney responded with 30 seconds, 1 sheet of paper, 3 American government sources, a binary with no escape, and 5 words that Washington has still not answered. The word he is looking for is mirror. Warren Buffett explained the principle that made it work, that the number of words you need is inversely proportional to the strength of your position. Brevity is certainty made audible. And the most powerful thing Carney said was everything he chose not to say. Can the White House answer a 30-second response that used American data to disprove an American accusation? If it could, why has every attempt in the days since only amplified the original clip? Can presidential credibility survive the viral replay of a moment that showed a foreign leader proving in half a minute, with one piece of paper, that the president's own government disagreed with him? The answers to those questions are still unfolding, but the deeper lesson, the one that extends far beyond this trade war and far beyond these two leaders, is already clear. In a world drowning in noise and hours of cable commentary, in thousands of social media posts, in the endless escalating volume of political language, the most powerful communication is the shortest. The most devastating argument is the one that does not need to